Do you agree that most people have come through a busy period of Christmas and the New Year? Are you feeling shattered? Overwhelmed? And sadly, if we rise above our own personal situation and you look around, you begin to see a bigger picture, and you can end up being even more overwhelmed. We see problems far bigger and far more complex than our ability to figure them out. We've got the war on terror, we've got Brexit, we've got the AIDS crisis in Africa, we've got poverty and homeless surrounding us. It goes on and on. Are you feeling even more overwhelmed? You see, feeling overwhelmed is simply a part of life. Sometimes we feel like the proverbial little boy trying to plug the hole in the dam with our fingers. And each time we stick a finger in, another hole appears. And following Jesus as a Christian doesn't make that sense of feeling overwhelmed go away. I remember listening to a TV evangelist say that when you accept Jesus, all your problems go. Yeah, right. I don't know what planet he was living on, but it certainly wasn't the way what happened to me when I accepted Jesus into my life. As I said, in fact, when you become a Christian, it can get worse. Because we're not only worried about the things that we can see, but we're also worried about the things we can't see. We're not only worried about things like our children and our health, but we've also got concerns about reaching the lost, about the vitality of our church, about the spiritual climate. So I want to talk to you this evening about running on empty. Have you been there? Running on empty. If you want to open to Mark 6, please. I want to use Mark 6 as an example for about running on empty. Let me read verse 31 to you. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." What was causing the followers of Jesus to be running on empty? Well, Jesus previously had sent his 12 apostles on a special assignment, a ministry trip. He gave the apostles authority and sent them out to the towns and the villages. This is part of their training, getting them ready for the time when Jesus would ascend to heaven and when he would be giving them the keys. And they came back, and let's be fair, they came back overjoyed that they'd had an effective and a successful ministry, but they were shattered. They were exhausted from the experience of ministry. And then Mark's comment about so many people coming and going, it makes it sound like Tesco's the day after Christmas. So Jesus invites his followers, those who trusted in him, to leave the crowds for a quiet place to rest. The Greek word for quiet place literally means desert place. The desert has got a strong association for Jewish people, because it was in the desert where they encountered God in the book of Exodus, you'll find it. And it was in the desert that they were tested and they were tempted. In Jewish thought, the desert was a place of proving and testing, yet also a place of renewal and restoration. So by calling his followers away from the crowd to a desert place, Jesus is reminding us that the essence of being a Christian isn't just doing stuff for Jesus. It's actually being with Jesus. And there is a big difference. You and I can get worn out doing stuff for Jesus. It's being with Jesus. That's the most important thing. And Jesus is literally inviting them to hang out with him, if I can put it in the modern term. To put their guard down. Not need to perform, not need to act, but simply just be themselves. And although their time of ministry was effective, they had to switch off from the ministry for a time. They were feeling overwhelmed by the chaos, the coming and the going of the crowd, the constant needs people kept bringing to Jesus. So let me give you a principle. When we follow Jesus, we will sometimes feel overwhelmed. Yes, when we follow Jesus, there will be times when we feel overwhelmed. You know, not being big-headed, but sometimes I feel like that mythical figure Atlas, who in Greek mythology carried the world on his shoulders. And on Monday mornings I can wake up feeling like Atlas. Because we carry the burdens of our friends, our family, the church, our community, and even the burdens of our nation. And sometimes you can feel that you're getting crushed. And I've got to be honest, there are times when I feel that way. I look at the task of sharing the good news of Jesus with every nation and every language, and I sometimes get overwhelmed just by the size of the task that we've got. I look around at my unchurched friends and family who haven't got a relationship with Jesus, and I can feel responsible for it. And then as a pastor, I can look at the congregation, I can look at the needs of the church, I can look at the church budget, I can look at the people who aren't growing and getting connected, and I feel like I've got to fix these problems. And when we start feeling that way, we need to be reminded that following Jesus is first and foremost about having a relationship with Jesus. That's the most important thing, is having a relationship. Not so much what you do or what you've done, it's about having a relationship. Certainly we don't need to go and do stuff just to impress Jesus. It's not conquering the evil of our world. We don't have to be a super Christian hero. It's literally about you and I being with him and being with his people in the community. Now that I find this difficult because I'm more of a doer than a beer, if you can understand that. When we feel overwhelmed as Christians, it's time to get back to the basics of what Jesus is all about. And I say to you tonight, there are times we just need to be with Jesus. We need to find a desert place, and we need to be with Jesus. And I make no bones about this. As a pastor, That's why I go away quite often. Because I need to get away to be with Jesus. I need to lay the church down. I need to lay people down. And I just need to be with Jesus. When we follow Jesus, we will sometimes feel overwhelmed. But we won't be any different to how the first Christians felt. So let me move on in Mark 6 and read verse 32 on. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. Now, you don't need to be told this. The best laid plans don't always turn out, do they? I have spent days planning something, only for it to be shattered completely. They've gone away in their boat and they found their little desert place, but the crowd has caught on. What do? They go and run, and they get to that desert. So they're actually waiting for Jesus and his followers to get there. Can you imagine that? Jesus and his followers have gone away to find a solitary place, and when they get there, the crowd's waiting for them. The plans of mice and men. It's like a story I knew about a father and son who were told about a very, very special secret fishing place. So the father and son packed up their fishing gear and started hiking through the woods. But when they got to this special place, it was so crowded with people fishing, they were elbow to elbow fishing. So much for secret fishing places. You know, we can feel for the exhausted followers of Jesus in this story. But when Jesus saw the crowd, we're told he had compassion on them. And the Greek word that Mark uses here is very graphic. It literally means he was moved to the core. The core of his being. He was moved to the core of his being. That's a very deep emotional word. A word that refers to having absolute compassion for another person. And he sees these people as sheep without a shepherd. Now this phrase, sheep without a shepherd, comes from the Old Testament. When Moses was dying, he commissioned this prodigy Joshua to lead Israel. Numbers says that he did this so that the people of Israel wouldn't be like sheep without a shepherd. And then in 1 Kings 22, an obscure prophet by the name of Micaiah says, I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd. And Ezekiel speaks of Israel being scattered because there was no shepherd. Each of these Old Testament references literally got a military overtone, where Israel is like a leaderless army, no one giving them direction. In Jesus' day, that's what the crowd was looking for. They wanted a charismatic military leader who would mobilize Israel and get rid of Rome. That's what they wanted. They weren't looking for a savior. They wanted a general who would rise up, get the army of Israel together, and shove Rome out of Israel. But Jesus saw beyond that. Jesus saw the crowd as being needy, aimless, without any direction. Now this phrase, sheep without shepherd, also plays a significant role within the church. The church has grown, and what I feel in my spirit is the Trinity is going to grow even more in the coming year. I shared this morning, I've had 4 people come up to me this morning asking to come into membership. Not bad for the first week of the year, is it? Which means the care needs of our people are not going to be met just by a pastor and 2 elders. It's going to mean that every member has got to pick up their ministry. But not only pick up their ministry, I've seen people pick up ministries before, but they're going to have to use their ministry, which is a big difference, isn't it? They're going to have to get out of their chair and they're going to have to start using their ministry. 1 Corinthians 12. God has set some in the church, first apostles, and I'm reading from the proper Bible, by the way. First apostles, secondly prophets, thirdly teachers, after that miracles, then gifts of healing, helps, governments, and diversity of tongues. If I can read from the New Living Translation, here are some of the parts God has appointed for the church. First are apostles, second are prophets, third are teachers, then those who do miracles, those who have the gift of healing, those who can help others, those who have the gift of leadership, those who speak in unknown languages. I'm going to be honest about this. Church, we're very good at acknowledging the beginning of this verse and the end of the verse. How about if we concentrate on the middle of the verse, particularly the King James? Helps, or the Living Bible states, those who can help others. At some time, every one of us is going to need help. Church, helps. In the coming year, we're going to need many helps. Amen? But going back, in verse 37 of Mark 6, look what Jesus did for sheep without a shepherd. He taught them. The desert retreat is put on hold because Jesus has got this compassion for the people, for the desperate people, the ones who are looking for a leader. So Jesus sits them down and talks to them about the kingdom of God. He begins to give them direction and guidance. Another thing for you to think about. When we follow Jesus, other people's needs become a high priority in our lives. Yes? Before I became a follower of Jesus, my basic approach to life was to use people and to love things. That was key. After coming to faith in Jesus, it all changed. I began to learn how to love people and to use things. It all got changed around. You see, when you become part of Jesus, you begin to realize how important people are. Did you get that? If you're a real Christian, you begin to realize how important people are. You begin to realize what C.S. Lewis wrote when he said, "You've never met a mere mortal." How many of you know that? You've never met a mere mortal. There's not a mere mortal in here tonight. You're all born again believers, and you're not a mere mortal. You've gone far beyond being a mere mortal. You're a supernatural being. Oh, did you know that? You are a supernatural being. You've gone above being a mere mortal. You are now a supernatural being. You then begin to realize that houses will fall, stock markets will crash, cars will break down. But then you realize, when it's all over, that people will last forever. It reminds me of the closing scene from Schindler's List. Germany has finally surrendered, and Schindler knows that he's a wanted man for using Jews as slave labor throughout the war. And as he prepares to run away, he's surrounded by over 1,000 Jews whose lives he saved. And his accountant turns to Schindler and gives him a piece of paper and says, "We've written a letter trying to explain things in case you were captured, and every worker has signed it." And Schindler begins to weep, saying, "I could have done more. I could have done more." And his friends reassure him, 1,100 people are alive because of you. And then Schindler looks at this car and says, "This car, what use is this car? Why did I keep it? I could have saved 10 more people." And he looks at his lapel pin, he says, "This is gold. I could have saved more." Schindler did an amazing thing, preserving the lives of 1,100 Jewish people during the darkest days of Germany. But he learned that people are more important than things. I wonder if we've learned that lesson. When you follow Jesus, I'm praying that his character begins to rub off on us and we start treating people differently. Our whole aspect, when we look at someone, we begin to treat them differently. Mark 6 verse 35. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "That would take more than a half year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" Jesus' followers are running on empty. They spend all their energy and their passion doing their ministry trip. And when they get back, there's so much commotion that they haven't had time to eat. And now their retreat is spoilt by all these crowds. So they finally come to Jesus saying, "Send them away. Get rid of them before the sun goes down." They want a break. They just want to be on their own with Jesus. They also know that there's no burger bars in the Galilean desert. And if they wait too long, they are aware that people will begin to dehydrate and begin to faint from hunger. But Jesus' response, "You give them something to eat." The disciples are literally saying, "It's not our problem. They're the ones who gate crashed. It's not our problem. They're the ones who didn't even think to bring a packed lunch." And Jesus says, "You meet their need. You meet it." And then they start worrying and thinking, "This is going to cost us. This is going to cost us a fortune." Another principle for you and I. When we follow Jesus, we will face needs that are far beyond our ability to meet. Amen? When we follow Jesus, we're going to come to that place where we face needs that are far beyond our ability to meet. And I believe Jesus has intentionally brought them to this place. Have you ever been in a situation where you feel over your head? How many of you been there, where you feel you're in a situation and you're over your head? Yes? Where we haven't got enough to do what we want to do. I know there's a motto that's quite common among Christians that says, God will never give us more than we can handle. There's a certain amount of truth in that. But this story reminds us that what we think we can handle and what God thinks we can handle are rather different things. God brings us into many situations where he calls us to meet needs, and they may be far beyond what we think we can do. A lot of people feel this way about their giving to the church. Now, I don't want to talk about finance. That's the easy part of giving. Money, that's the easy part. I go back to what I shared earlier, being a help. It means that you're going to have to give of yourself. Now, going back to a previous sermon where I spoke about giving gifts, when you give a gift of any meaning, part of you is in that gift. So you're going to have to give of yourself. When we face an overwhelming need, Jesus sometimes comes to us and says, you meet the need. And we look and we can't imagine how on earth we're going to do it. It's trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. We're going back to Mark, verse 38. How many loaves do you have, he asked. Go and see. And when they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of 150, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. Ladies, that's not even counting you. All right, that's just the men. So you can literally double that. And there are probably a lot of kids there as well. And after this week up with my grandchildren up in the north, they can eat more than me. So I'm fully aware with kids. Okay? But let's look what happened next. Now Jesus could have simply made bread materialize from nowhere. He could have done that. We're talking about the Son of God, the all-powerful one. And he can do anything. But he doesn't make the bread appear from nothing. He makes the followers find out how much they've got. And they come up with the 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's not even enough for a good picnic. And Jesus breaks the people into manageable groups. And then he takes what the disciples have collected. And he thanks God for it. And he breaks the loaves. And he gives it back to his followers with a direction to give it out to the people. And as they give it out, miraculously, everyone eats until they're satisfied. And yet, after everyone is eaten and satisfied, they've still got leftovers. This is what scholars call a nature miracle. But this nature miracle is unique because it's the only miracle from Jesus' earthly life that is recording in all the Gospels. It's also unique because it's the only miracle of multiplication where Jesus takes what someone else gives him and multiplies it. But I want you to notice something about Mark. He never tells us when the miracle occurred. Did it happen when the disciples gave the bread and the fish to Jesus? Did it happen when Jesus prayed over it? Or when Jesus gives it back to his followers? Or was it while they were distributing it? Mark doesn't tell us. There's also an intentional contrast here between the banquet in the desert and the banquet which is referred to earlier in this chapter. If you go back to 21 and 29, King Herod had a birthday and he had a celebration banquet, and it was all important wealthy people who went to it. It was a banquet full of seduction and deceit. It ended with the violent death of John the Baptist. But this banquet in the desert, instead of a palace, it's a banquet for everyone, not just important people. And it's a banquet that ends with everyone being satisfied with life instead of death. This banquet in the desert is also reminiscent of the story of Moses' miraculous feeding Israel in the wilderness. And you can find another principle here. When we follow Jesus, God will multiply what we give him far beyond our expectations. And some of us have found that out, okay? They presented Jesus with just a few loaves and a couple of fish. And God multiplied it to feed thousands. I think Mark purposely doesn't tell us when the miracle occurred, because when we give what we have to Jesus, the way it multiplies is often mysterious. It simply doesn't make sense from a human point of view. But when you look at the overall effect of what we gave, we realize the effect was far greater than what we gave Jesus. Notice, the disciples were overwhelmed by a need that Jesus told them to meet. So they gave Jesus the little that they had. He consecrates it and gives it back to them. And then you see what happens. It increases. You see, when they gave it to Jesus, they surrendered ownership of it. But when Jesus gave it back, he gave it back to them to manage. It wasn't theirs, it was his. They were just to serve and to manage. They become stewards of what now belongs to Jesus. Let me tell you how it works. In the face of overwhelming need, Jesus says, you meet the need. And we start murmuring, oh, we haven't got enough, we can't do it. But if we give to Jesus anyway, and he sets it apart, he consecrates it to God. And instead of keeping it himself, he gives it back to us. This time trusting us to use what belongs to him. Church, time we learn. It's not my house, not my bank account. It's not my clothes. It's not my investment. It's not my job. It's his house. He's entrusted it to me. It's his bank account. It's his clothes. It's his investments. Just because I'm in possession of it doesn't mean I own them any longer. I've given them to Jesus. I've given him the little that I had. It's as if everything I have has been stamped with the phrase, property of Jesus entrusted to him. I've got to tell you that this has changed the way I view my life. It changed my giving in the church. It changed my commitment to time. My commitment to ministry. It even changes the way I view the homeless people on the street. It changes the way I treat my car, my home, my groceries. Sometimes it takes a whole lifetime to really make this complete. And the wonderful, exciting thing about this is how when I use what Jesus has given back to me, it's got far-reaching effects that even now continue to blow my mind. I'll let you into a little secret. Over the last 2 years as a church, we've actually seen miracles based on what I've been sharing with you tonight. Some of you might not be aware of it. 2 years ago, at our carol service, Mo and myself looked at the amount of food that we had out here, and then we looked in here and seen how many people we got, and we shook our head and we said, we're going to be stretched. There's not enough. So we prayed. Simple prayer. Mo and I joined hands and we asked the Lord to increase, to multiply. This year, I wasn't about. Angie laid out that tremendous banquet we had out there, but then we had a church on that afternoon which was totally overflowing. We had more people than we've ever had here. And Angie looked and she thought, oh. She didn't pray once, she prayed twice, I'm told. Lord, let it be enough to increase. And guess what? In both instances, we had food left over. Amazing, isn't it? If we give it to Jesus, he gives it back to us for us to use. Amen? God can take whatever we give him, no matter how small and insignificant it might be, and use it in incredible ways, far beyond our expectation. So, my friends, if you are running on empty, if you're feeling overwhelmed, feeling that everything is beyond you, if you're feeling that you're carrying the world on your shoulders, just remember what Jesus said. You give them something to eat. You meet the need. Just learn this. Whatever little you've got, if you give it truly to Jesus, if you surrender it all to Jesus, he'll use it far beyond our wildest dreams. Mind you, you're still going to feel overwhelmed from time to time. I can't stop that. There will be occasions when you will feel overwhelmed. I get overwhelmed by just seeing what God does. I see the way God works in some people, and I get totally overwhelmed by just seeing what God is doing. I was overwhelmed the other week when God healed my arm. Casualty told me I'd broken it, put it in plaster. A week later I go down and they cut the plaster off and there's no break. You get slightly overwhelmed with that, don't you? I'm lying in a hospital bed. I've shared this with you. Lying in a hospital bed, been there for a week. On the Monday, the consultant comes around with his gang of doctors, and I turned to him and said, can I go on holiday on Friday? Now I've just got over water infection, sepsis and pneumonia. And he looks at me. Now I already knew, because my son's a consultant, and he said, Dad, it takes up to a month, 28 days for all the symptoms to be gone. They went away in a conflap and he came back, and it's got to be God. Yeah, go on your holiday. Friday we flew out to Lanzarote. It's got to be God, you see. But it does leave you with a sense of being overwhelmed. When God really moves, you can feel overwhelmed. But we're going to be overwhelmed on occasions. You're going to look at things and think, how on earth am I going to meet that? How am I going to do that? Well, give the little that you've got. You give it to God and watch what he does with it. Amen.